there, my geometry students. Welcome to Complete the Square via video. I'm going to let you know this section might be a little tricky, might stretch your brain a little bit, so be prepared. Doesn't mean it's impossible. Does not mean you start giving up right now. In fact, it means you do the opposite. It means make sure you ask for help. Okay, if you are not understanding something, you need to pause the video and ask for help. You need to go rewind and watch it again. You cannot fast forward, so watch it all the way through. Pay attention the first time. That way you don't have to watch it 2 or 3 times. But just know, some of this stuff is a little bit tricky. People tend to struggle with this section. I tend to struggle with this section. So if you feel frustrated at times, you are not alone, okay? But persevere, and we're going to do this together. All right, so this section is called Completing the Square. We kind of talked a little bit already about some of the things that it leads to and where it comes from and a little bit of the history behind it. The biggest thing is we want to get a perfect square trinomial. The whole point of that is that we can get a nice quadratic equation. We've graphed a ton of quadratics. Remember we talked about the left, right, up, down movement of the graphs? We just did a little bit of review on that before you're watching this video if you're in class with us. Oh, and its transformations. And we want to be able to solve stuff that's not factorable. Unfortunately, not everything works out to a nice, wonderful, pretty, factorable problem. But we still need to be able to solve it. So this is one of the ways in which we can do it where it works out. So pause here if you need to. Moving on. All right, so perfect square trinomial. Remember last week when we did that awesome lesson, well, re-lesson really, on factoring? And you guys were like, this is so easy, it's awesome. Well, that's what we're doing again today, a little bit. Slate's going to be part of it. So first one, x squared plus 6x plus 9. Well, the factors of 9 are 1 and 9, 3 and 3. The only 2 numbers that multiply to 9 and add to 6 are 3 and 3. This is one of those special ones. And hopefully you'll start to kind of get used to seeing these where you can do it automatically. You don't have to do this whole thing where you write it out. If you already knew it in your head, you could have just written down this. And yes, you do have to do that. Remember on Thursday you guys were like, why do I have to square it? Well, that's because today. That's why. It's going to be a part of today. And it's extremely important. You cannot end with just that. You have to end with the squared form. And that's what that is. Same thing over here. Pay attention to your negative. The only 2 numbers that multiply to 64 and add to negative 16 are double digits, 8 times 8. I could go through the rest of the factors, but for time's sake, I'm not going to. Okay? But this is factoring. This is review. I'm not going to drag our feet through this. You guys should know this. And again, remember, when you shrink it down, it becomes squared. All right? If you need to do a little lesson on factoring or you're struggling, raise your hand now and ask. Because if you can't factor, you might have some problems. Okay, but it's important that we can get to here and here. That's a huge, huge part of completing the square. Pause here if need be. Moving right along. All right, so here are our fill-in-the-blanks. Yes, I know, constant is spelled wrong. Couldn't change it. I tried. My bad. Should say constant. Constant is just another name for the number that does not have an x. So if it's plus 3 or minus 10 at the end, that's the constant. We're going to push that away from the variable terms. Yes, I know that doesn't make sense. It will when we do it. Figure out b over 2 squared. That's our go-to formula. It's very important. Write it down. It's going to make sense later. Add and subtract it. Got to make it equal. If I'm going to add, I also have to subtract to zero it out. And factor it. Again, just write down the steps. I get that it doesn't make sense. Do it anyway. We're going to make more sense out of it. One more problem. Okay, so let's dual page this, and we'll get here, keep our notes off to the side, move on to our first one. All right, so over here, this is at the bottom of your page. I'm really sorry that I did not leave you a ton of space in these couple sections. I apologize, but I did what I could to fit it. So b over 2 squared. Remember back to our standard form, we talked about ax squared plus bx plus c, hopefully that's ringing some bells, A is always the thing that's multiplied to x squared, B is always the thing that's multiplied to x, and C is always the thing that's just by its lonesome. So in number 1, 16 is B. In number 2, negative 8 is B. Remember to take the sign with it. I'm going to actually do that with my 16 over here. And so all we're going to do right now is figure out what does that formula equal. Because this is a really important formula for completing the square. So if I'm plugging in 16 for b over 2 squared, that's all I'm focusing on right now. I'm not even doing the rest of the complete the square. I just want to know how to do this stuff. Same thing over here. Negative 8 over 2 squared. That's all we're practicing right now. Obviously I have to solve it. Okay, and again, b is the one that's attached to x. That's why I chose 16, that's why I chose negative 8. Didn't choose 1 or 28 because they're not attached to x. 16 divided by 2 is 8. Keep it in parentheses for a reason. 8 squared is 64. That is my golden complete the square number for that problem. Negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4. Again, keep it in your parentheses. Negative 4 times negative 4 is not negative 16. If you said that, shame, shame, shame. Positive 16. Okay, that's why we kept it in parentheses. Okay, so that is the first part to complete the square. I will show you what the heck you do with that number, but I just want to make sure you know how to plug it in your formula. So b over 2 squared, take the number attached to x, plug it in. Alright, moving along. Alright, you guys are going to try this one. This is the third one. So pause right here, do it yourself. Don't make me do it for you because I'm not going to. Pause, do it, move on. Alright, this is on the back side now, so flip it over. This one says find b over 2 squared and set it up to complete the square. So, just a second. Alright, so on this one, we are going to do the same exact thing we just did. Hopefully you already know in your head that 6 is the number we're going to use. Okay, and so we're going to do step 1, 6 over 2 squared. 6 divided by 2 is 3. 3 squared is 9. Keep it right here. Do not get rid of those parentheses. That 9 is super important, though. Alright, so now we're going to go back to our steps. It says push the constant away from the variable terms. This is how we set up completing the square. And you know what? It's going to look really weird. It's going to feel confusing, but just hang tight with me. If you're really confused, ask for help. The constant up here is negative 78. That's the one that doesn't have a variable with it. So I'm going to do this. Put a blank here. Put negative 78. Put another blank here. I have not changed anything about my problem except to insert some blanks. That is it. So don't freak out when you see it. All it is I'm just shifting stuff over to make room for this magical number 9. Step 2, figure out what b over 2 squared is. Look at you guys, you already figured that out in step 1. We kind of switched it around, whatever, it's fine. Step 3, add b over 2 squared to the blank and subtract it from the end. The reason we have to add and subtract is what is positive 9 minus 9? It's 0. That's the whole point. I can't just randomly add 9 to my equation without also getting rid of it over here. Okay, I gotta make sure I balance my equation. Okay, I can't just randomly add stuff in. Normally whatever we do to one side, we do to the other side, but since it's on the same side of the equation, we have to counteract it. Otherwise it doesn't work. Alright, so ignore this stuff. That was from when I went a little bit too far. Just gonna ignore that right now. Okay, so you guys are gonna do the second one, the m squared minus 18. I think it's right there. Yep. You're going to try this one, do the same exact thing I did. All you are doing is doing the b over 2 squared, and then set up your equation. Where should the gaps go? Where should the blanks go? Okay, so you're just doing baby steps right now. We're not doing the whole thing in one step, because this stuff is a little bit tricky. So do this one, pause, do it, pause. Do not, just, don't cheat. Just pause and do it. Okay, it's for your own good, I promise. I don't care if you don't like it. Please do it. Alright, Moving on to this one. Now we're actually going to complete the square. So this is where it gets a little crazy. So hang tight while we go through this. Step 1, just like we were doing, b over 2 squared. 16 is still b. All right, still pretty easy so far. 16 over 2 squared equals 8 squared. That equals 64. Woo! Okay. Got our magic number. Not too scary so far. I know I switched steps around, whatever. Step 2, we're going to push the constant away from the variable terms. So just like you just practiced in the 2 problems above, all we're going to do is make a little space. Space to complete the square, space to subtract completing the square. Okay, and that's where we kind of stopped in the last section. Now we're going to actually complete the square. So this is where this guy comes in. That was the whole point of doing that first step, is that number is going to drop in right here. And you guys did that in your other step. You added it and you subtracted it. That was what you're supposed to do if you practiced it. Okay? Now we're going to actually simplify it. That means I got to take this guy and actually get my perfect square trinomial. That was the whole point of doing all this craziness, was I wanted to get to look like that. And if you look at that, that looks like those things that we practiced on Thursday last week and the things that I reviewed way back at the beginning of this lesson. It's a perfect square. What's the number that multiplies by itself to get 64 and adds to itself to get 16? Well, it's the square root of 64. That's 8. If I do k plus 8 times k plus 8, it gets me this group right here. That was the whole point of getting that 64. I'm not going to write k plus 8 times k plus 8, though. I'm going to write k plus 8 squared. And then at the end, now I can combine my constants. Well, positive 54 minus 64 is negative 10. Ta-da! You have now completed the square. You took something that was unfactorable and you put it in vertex form, which is how we graphed it at the beginning of the whole lesson. Okay, I'm going to do one more, then you guys are going to try a couple. Don't you dare cheat and try and skip over it. All right, I'm going to do this one. I'm going to breeze through it because I'm running out of my time here. Step 1, take my b, which is negative 6, b over 2 squared. That's always your step 1. Negative 6 divided by 2, negative 3. Notice I'm keeping it in parentheses. Negative 3 squared is, oops, not in parentheses here, is positive 9. Step 2, give yourself a little space. Make a blank. Make a blank. Again, I haven't changed the problem. I just scooshed it over a little bit. All right, take your magic number 9. Plus here, minus here. Got to even it out. Don't you dare put plus plus. You can't randomly add 18 to one side of the equation. Don't do it. Now here's a little trick that I forgot to tell you in the last one. Whatever number is here, right here, you can just cheat and use that. You don't have to try and figure out what times what gets you 9 and 6. Just take that number. It's always going to be x and that number squared. You can even check. Negative 3 squared is 9. Negative 3 plus negative 3 is negative 6. You can even check. It would work out like this. Just use that number, though. The back number is what you add and subtract. That squared number is what you stick into the parentheses. And then you still have these constants stuck at the back end. But again, that's our vertex form. That was the whole point of this whole shindig, was doing that stuff. Okay? So now what you're going to do is you're going to do your remaining 2 problems. We will kind of go over as a group how you solve by completing the square. If you want to try it out yourself, go ahead. The blank that you're going to fill in is set y equals 0. So once you have it like this, look at this is just like what we did on Monday and Friday. You can solve for that now. That was the whole point, was you had to get it to that. I know that seems really obnoxious and long, but it really is important. It does a lot of stuff that we've been talking about. So try this one and this one right now. Do it. Don't you dare cheat. I'm going to be walking around. Mr. Colt or Mrs. Brown will be as well.